Okay, welcome everybody. I'd like to call to order the Cabarrus County Board of Commissioners Budget Workshop session for May the 22nd. Again, if you are here in the room with us and you have your cell phone, please put it on vibrate or silence it so that when you inevitably get a phone call in the middle of the meeting, we all won't listen to the music. How's that? We're going to start off with the overview of the operating budget. As commissioners, as you all know, we received the budget last night. I'm sure you all stayed up until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning reading it page by page by page. So this will be real easy since Erica's here to help make sure we do know what the overview is. So Erica, we are grateful to have you here with us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, last night, the county manager presented you with his recommended budget along with some of its highlights. Over the next few meetings, we will be discussing the budget in more detail. Today, we will have an overview of the entire budget, specifically revenues and any expenditures tied to county services. In subsequent meetings, the school districts will be here, the fire districts will be here, and any non-governmental agencies will be here to present their budgets in more detail. So today we're going to focus specifically on county services. I'm going to start you out with revenues. This is an overview of this is an outline of our discussion for today. We'll discuss revenue sources specifically, and any increases or decreases to those revenues, those primary drivers. We'll also look at expenditures. We'll look at expenditures by service area. We'll take a look at expenditures by funding matrix. We'll talk about any service changes that are reflected in the budget, along with personnel changes that have occurred. I'll give you an overview of funding for public education and outside agencies as well. Following that, we'll talk about our 5-year plan and the impact the current year budget has on it, and forecast that for revenues and expenditures over the next 5 years. We'll take a break, and after the break, we'll look at the CIP, the capital improvement plan, and then after that, we'll discuss any next steps in the budget process. Okay. This slide is an overview of how the FY13 recommended budget compares to our current year's budget. What you'll see is that the county manager has recommended a budget at a tax rate of 70 cents, which is a 7-cent difference from our 63% tax rate that we currently have. Property values have declined after revaluation to $18.4 billion. This is a $2.6 billion decrease, or 12.3% decrease since our valuations as of our current year budget, FY12. This has impacted the value of the penny. The value of the penny has decreased from $2 million to $1.7 million, which is 11.9 or 12% decrease. The county budget is recommended. We have the budget for all funds is budgeted at $211,152,696, which is a 21.7% decrease from our current year's budget. The general fund also represents a 21.7% decrease, with total revenues and expenditures budgeted at $200,011,036. This is a $55.7 million decrease from the current budget. These reductions in the budget have reflected a reduction in our personnel FTE. The recommended budget has a reduction of 6.27 FTE. So the FTE goes from 957.13 FTE to 950.86 FTE. And we'll talk about specifically which FTEs those are later on in the presentation. The county's annual budget is comprised of 5 different funds. The general fund, which is our largest fund, is $200 million, as I spoke of earlier. And then there are other funds. The next largest is the health insurance fund, which is budgeted at $7.7 million, the landfill fund, the arena events fund, and then finally the 911 emergency fund. Those are our 5 annual funds. Okay. Going on to revenues. I feel like I've lost my sound, but maybe it's still here. Going on to revenues. Revenues begin in your budget book on page 43. It outlines all of the, defines all of our revenue sources and talks about some of the changes. I'm going to highlight a few for you today. Ad valorem taxes, which is our largest revenue source, has decreased 2.77% from the FY12 amended budget. This includes real property taxes and DMV taxes as well. Real property taxes are budgeted at $4 million less than the amended budget. We have experienced an increase in the valuations of motor vehicles, so those are budgeted at an increase of 16%. So overall, the revenue for ad valorem taxes has decreased about 2.8%, and we budget that at a 97.2% collection rate. Okay. Other revenue has declined, or has increased, actually, 8.7%. The primary revenue source in this is sales taxes, and that's where our biggest increase is in this category. Revenues from sales taxes budgeted at $30 million, $30.8 million, which is an 18% increase from the current year's budget. But there are also other categories within this. There are other funding sources, or other revenues within this category, which includes cable franchise fees and disposal tax on white goods. Those are in the land. That last one is in the landfill fund. And some of those other revenues have experienced decreases, but due to the increases that we're projecting or are experiencing with sales taxes, revenues in this category has increased 8.7%. Intergovernmental revenues. Intergovernmental revenues are revenues that we receive from other governments. They can be grants or pass-through dollars that we receive. Human Services is primarily the agencies that receive these funds. This category is remaining relatively flat, though there are some decreases in some departments. Planning and Development and Transportation are receiving additional revenues in this category. Will be receiving additional grants in FY13, so that's helped to keep this category relatively flat. FY12 is the last year of ERA funding, so you will see a decrease in in planning development with regards to that revenue source. But there are other revenue sources that are being picked up, which keeps this category relatively flat. Permits and fees is seeing a increase. Gotten really loud. Has seen an increase in its revenue, increased by 14.55%. Register of Deeds revenue is experiencing an increase, along with building inspections with planning and development. We're experiencing those increase actually this year, so it has allowed us to increase the revenues that we are budgeting for those two sources. Revenues for the Register of Deeds for next year is budgeted at 6.5% increase, and likewise construction standards building inspection fees are projected to grow to $1.42 million, which is a 22.5% increase from what we currently have budgeted. I'll go on to sales and service. This category is relatively flat. We do project some decline in some revenue sources there. Sales and services are for are revenues that the county receives for any services that we render, such as participation in parks and recs. EMS ambulatory fees are in here, along with landfill tipping fees are in this category as well. We are proposing some fee increases for the landfill, as discussed in previous board meetings, and ambulatory fees are proposed to increase as well, and we'll talk about some of the fee changes a little later on. But those fee increases will help to offset some of the other decreases, which helps to keep this category relatively flat from FY12 to FY13. Let's see. I'm going to skip down to other financing sources. went from 48 million to 10.2 million. This is primarily due to refinancing of debt, so we had some COPs that were refunded earlier in the year. That's one-time transaction to occur, so that's is reflected or appears as a decrease in revenue sources there.
Just to interject, that's the same thing that is affecting the investment income is the recording of that COPS refinancing.
That also, there's something that I know that was confusing to me for the first couple of years, but I think the public to understand is that when we finance or we issue debt, when the bonds are sold, that money goes into the general fund, passes through the general fund, and is spent out of the general fund, right? So you may see something like that where you see a big increase one year or a big drop, and that's what that usually is when we've either issued debt or like last year refinanced.
Yes, typically
Debt.
when we refinance debt, when we actually issue debt, it goes into the project fund, but when we refinance it, there is a paper journal entry that we have to make on our books, and we have to run the transaction through it, so we record a revenue and an expense, which inflates the budget for a one-time process, but
So
when we actually
technically
do
we
it,
didn't-
like I said, for a specific
so we really-
project, it goes in the individual fund.
So we really didn't cut 55 million out of the budget this year. Some people might see that and think we cut $55.5 million out of the budget. It's just that we did not, because of the accounting entry.
Right, and you also remember that the $9.5 million to pay off the annex is also in that
Okay,
budget figure.
okay.
So overall, for all annual funds, the budgets have decreased, the budgeted revenues have decreased $58 million, or 21.7%. As we just discussed, those other financing sources is a big chunk of that amount, also some one-time fund balance appropriations. But following that, the biggest revenue reductions are those in ad valorem taxes, and we are enjoying the benefit of some increases in areas such as sales tax, which will help offset some of those reductions. This is an illustration of our revenue by source, just so this illustration to show how much is coming from the various revenue sources. As you can see, a majority of our revenue, 60%, comes from ad valorem taxes. The next largest area would be other taxes, which is sales tax. And then intergovernmental revenues will follow that, and then the other revenues sources are shown here as well. This year we did complete a revaluation. State statute requires that for comparison purposes, that any time a jurisdiction does a reval, we are required to provide a revenue neutral tax calculation. For comparison purposes. This is, I wanted to show you guys, it's on page 4 in the budget book. This is the calculation, the revenue neutral calculation. To walk you through it, the projected final assessed valuation for the current fiscal year is $20.9 billion. At a tax rate of 63 cents, the tax levy is $132,246,553. With the new valuation for those same properties, the valuation dropped from $20.9 billion to $8.4 billion. Based on that $8.4 billion value, to generate $132 million in revenue, the county would have to assess a tax rate of 71.9 cents. That's the first step. The second step is for the county to factor in a growth factor, whether it's positive or negative growth. And over the last 4 years, we've had some of both. And this shows you, this chart here shows you the growth from year to year. From the first year evaluation to the second year, the second fiscal year, we had some growth of 2.9%. But since then, values have decreased, and you'll see the amount of those reductions there. So overall, our average growth is less than 1%, it's 0.2%. So we apply that 0.2% to the 71.9 cent, which gives us a revenue neutral tax rate of 72 cents. The last step would be to adjust for any annexations or de-annexations to occur, and none of those have occurred, so that's not applicable to us.
How does that affect our budget with annexation or de-annexation?
So if we were to annex in additional areas,
Right.
then we would also have to factor in the values for those and apply those values within that calculation. Same thing for de-annexation. We would have to pull those out.
So that's not for municipality?
It's more for cities.
Yeah, that would be,
Okay.
not
But-
counties. That would be.
Right.
That would be cities.
Okay, but how does that, I don't understand how that affects, I mean, if we set the value and then they have their own property tax rate and we do as well, I don't understand how that affects.
This formula is for all jurisdictions.
for
So
all.
if a city were going through this calculation
I
and
see.
during that period went through an annexation or a de-annexation, they would have to make an adjustment.
Okay, I see.
Would it not, also not affect the tax, I mean, the sales tax distribution, or is that when we say, actually set the property tax rate?
An annexation would have the city gain more property value,
Mhm.
which would definitely affect the distribution of sales tax,
Mhm.
because we use the ad valorem method.
Okay.
Okay. All right. This, I'm sorry, that's fine. This chart here, it shows, I wanted to show you how the current tax, or the current tax rate and the new tax rate compares to each other and the amount of revenue that it brings in for ad valorem taxes. As you can see here, our tax rate has remained flat for the last 5 years at 63 cents. And at a 63-cent tax rate, we have been able to generate at least $130 million in ad valorem tax revenues. Increasing the tax rate to 70 cents still gives us, although we're increasing the rate, we are producing, or will be receiving less revenue than that at 63 cents that has occurred over the past 5 years. So that's what this chart is showing you here. Just again to highlight some of the revenue changes, the primary drivers in the revenue changes. Ad valorem taxes, current taxes will be declining $3.5 million in the recommended budget. Sales tax will be increasing $2.5 million in the recommended budget. Fees from EMS with the proposed fee increase will give us an additional $708,000 in revenue. Along with building inspections, we anticipate $260,000 in additional revenue than we currently have budgeted. Some of the one-time funding sources will be going away, so it have a negative impact on the amount that we have budgeted for revenues, which is fund balance, which is one-time source, also the debt financing that we just spoke of, $38 million there. Before we go on to expenditures, I'd like to highlight some of the fee changes. I think I gave someone. I'd like to highlight some of the fee changes I spoke about with regards to the revenue sources. In the back of your book, in the supplemental section, is where we keep our fee changes, beginning on page 297 to 305. EMS is proposing fee changes for 3 of their services. Each year, departments are, along with their budget requests, they are to submit any fee changes that need to occur to help recover the cost of current service delivery. EMS, landfill, the libraries, and the Department of Aging have submitted fee increases for the upcoming fiscal year. These fee changes are highlighted on the page that I just pointed out, that I just passed out to everyone. EMS is proposing fee increases for ALS 2, which is Advanced Life-Saving Procedures, such as surgical airway and endotracheal intubation, thank you. Some very important things. From $450 to $500. ALS 1 for advanced life-saving procedures, such as IVs, EKGs, et cetera, from $400 to $450. Mileage is increased, they're proposing to increase that rate from $650 to $750. Landfill, this was discussed in some previous budget board meetings. For construction and demolition, the per ton fee is proposed to change from $31 to $35. And libraries are proposing to actually reduce their temporary resident card from $15 to $10. This reduction is based on current practice, actually. And then on the back of the page, the senior center will be updating their the fees for rental facilities, for facility rentals within their facilities, and there are various rates that are highlighted there. In adopting the FY13 budget, these fee increases are included in that budget, in this budget. Any questions about revenues before I move on to expenditures? Okay. Looking at expenditures by service area. Overall expenditures, like revenues, have been decreased by 21.7%, of course, to match available revenues. Departments are directed to back out all one-time expenditures, and we've done that countywide. Plus, departments were directed to identify any efficiencies and cost savings, and they've done a pretty good job of that. Our largest service area is education and school debt, which accounts for 42% of our budget. This area has current expenditures for the schools remain flat, but you will note in the budget detail that there is a 1.7% decrease to this area, and this is all due to one-time capital outlay and also to debt that has been paid off for RCC. So that's the decrease to education services and debt. The next largest area is human services. That accounts for 18% of the county's budget. There's a 1.97% decrease in human services. This is primarily due to the loss of some state and federal revenue, some reductions of grants that we haven't received notifications of as well. And then there are also some FTE reductions as a result of reorganizations, and we'll talk about personnel changes a little later on. But some of those FTE reductions are in aging, in DSS, and in transportation. Public safety is the next largest area at 14% of our budget. Their expenditures have decreased 4.6%. This is some of the primary reasons for that is in the 911 fund, they had a lot of one-time capital expenditures last year that will not occur for, I say last year, I mean current year, that will not occur for FY13. Also in construction standards, due to some of the management changes that have occurred over the past year, we had some positions that were reduced, and we also have some positions that were frozen as well. So some of those changes occurred in FY12, but it was FY13 that you'll see the monetary reductions. And then the last largest area is general government, which accounts for almost 14% of county expenditures. Overall, this service area decreased by 9.8%. And the biggest reduction is due to the county's contribution to the health insurance fund. Although all departments within this area have identified various reductions and are providing the same service or more with fewer resources. Overall, what you'll see in county services for the FY13 year is that We're dealing with challenges of providing the same service with fewer resources, and as a result, some of the impacts will be delay in some of our IT projects and delay in facility painting and recarpeting. Higher mileage vehicles will be on the road, and some departments will be working with older equipment. We've talked about the funding matrix since our board retreat in January, and this is a snapshot of the county funding or county budget by those funding matrix categories. The matrix is found on page 58 through 62 of your budget document, but this is an overview. Those services that we are mandated to provide and we have no choice to provide the service, and we have no choice in the level of service, account for 20% of our tax rate. Those services that we're mandated to provide, but we have discretion at what level to provide those services, they account for 37% of the tax rate. We added a new category at our last retreat where we broke out the discretionary services. Those services that are discretionary, but we consider to be business imperative services or services that we need to run the county, such as our HR department, our IT department, and our general services department, they account for 7% on the tax rate. And all other discretionary services account for 6% of the tax rate. The next few slides are just all of the county services in the matrix categories. Okay. Some of the primary drivers for our expenditure changes: the retirement of debt service with the jail annex. This decision was made by the board at their retreat. At your retreat, this is a 10.2. This impacts our budget by $10.2 million, so we are able to reduce debt service by $10.2 million as a result of that action. Retirement of other debt service allows us to reduce the budget expenditures by $2.8 million. We have about $2 million in personnel reductions. Contribution from the health insurance fund, that's $1.6 million expenditure that we will not see in the FY13 budget. Overall operational reductions from all county services add up to about $1.5 million in reductions. I'm going to skip to the Kannapolis City obligation. This is a new expenditure that we picked up this current year as a result of improvements in Kannapolis. That is a $1.4 million increase to our annual budget. With all the reductions that have occurred, this increases our contingency by $620,000. Some of the service changes that are reflected in the budget: aging services and programs. The county manager spoke about this briefly last night. With some of the reorganization that is occurring in the aging department with human services and parks and rec, we're able to create a parks and recreation department, which will increase recreational opportunities for both seniors and our younger generation. And the hopes there is to increase intergenerational recreational opportunities. Another enhancement is the addition of a crime scene officer. This was also highlighted last year. The sheriff has requested an additional crime scene officer to help out with some of the investigations to occur, and this is reflected in the county manager's recommended budget. The recommended budget also includes increased library hours, so we have additional part-time positions so that we're able to have the libraries open for longer periods of time for the public to enjoy. Another enhancement is increased funding for the animal shelter. For animal shelter maintenance, the county will be, that's one of our strategy changes. The county manager is recommending outsourcing animal shelter maintenance, which will allow the current animal shelter staff to focus on other areas of animal control. Other strategy changes are those in local economy. We'll see position impact as a result of that, but the county is currently revisiting the way we will be providing that service. Also, recycle collections. The county is looking at outsourcing the collection of recyclables, and this is a strategy change as well, which also has an FTE impact. Are there any questions on the service changes, service enhancements? This is a summary of the personnel changes. Personnel changes are found, personnel changes are found on page 63 through 66 of the budget document. This is a summary of the changes that have occurred. As I said earlier, the recommended budget reduces full-time equivalents by 6.27 FTE. I spoke about the additions, the crime scene officer and library assistants. The crime scene officer is 1 FTE, and the part-time positions equate to 3.4 FTE for the library. Positions that have been deleted are a revaluation data collector. This is in the tax office, and this is in a rotation with the reval. So this was an anticipated deletion to occur. Also, as a result of reorganization, a program coordinator and part-time in-home aides have been reduced in aging. Also, a social worker position in DSS and a transportation supervisor have been deleted in the recommended budget. I talked about outsourcing, waste reduction or recycling. That impact is a 1 FTE. There is a literacy coordinator position that will be deleted in the budget. This is a grant-funded position, so that as those grant funds go away, so will the position. Some change in hours to occur as a result of the recommended budget. The office assistant is in the tax collection office, in the tax office as well, and is associated with the reval. So those hours there will be a reduction in the hours budgeted for that position. Also, park ranger positions will be increased by 0.16 of an FTE for increased recreational opportunities. And then for the part-time transportation officers and the bailiffs, this is a reduction not in scheduled time, but a reduction in the amount of dollars budgeted for those areas. We have found that over the past few years, we have budgeted more than we have expensed in that area, so we are correcting that budget so that we're budgeting appropriately. Those are our personnel changes. Any questions there? This is an overview of county funding for public education. As the county manager indicated last night, funding for current expense for the school systems remain flat, although there is some shifting in the amounts that will be allocated for each school district based on the ADM numbers. Well, you'll see that shifting is in building maintenance for Kannapolis City Schools. There's a reduction of $143,876 there. But the technology funding for Cabarrus County Schools increased by that same amount. In capital outlay, there's been a change there as well. Kannapolis City Schools will receive an additional $50,000 in capital outlay. Historically, their capital outlay has been $50,000, and that's been bumped up to $100,000. Schools are found on pages 261 through 266 of the budget document. Okay. Roy and Cabarrus Community College, funding is recommended to remain flat in this area. The only changes there are in debt service and In debt service, I think capital outlay it remains the same, about $100,000 has been budgeted there traditionally, historically, excuse me. This is an overview of the recommended budget, the current budget and the recommended budget, and the amounts requested by outside agencies or non-governmental agencies. These agencies will be in between the 24th and the 29th to discuss more details regarding their budget requests. But based on the information we've received, the Health Alliance has requested a $993,000 increase in their funding. However, county funding is budgeted at $4.1 million for the Health Alliance. Piedmont Behavioral Health is requesting flat funding at $661,000. Community Care Clinic is currently budgeted at $50,000. They are requesting $100,000 for the FY13 budget year. However, county funding is not recommended for this agency. The EDC has requested $312,000, which is $50,000 more than their current allocation. Current funding is recommended at $262,000 for this agency. The Arts Council has requested the same amount of funding as they currently have allocated, which is $26,000. The Special Olympics, this budget was actually already approved by the board at a previous board meeting, but funding remains flat for the Special Olympics. And then the last agency is the Forester. We contract with them for forestry services. Their budget request is increased by $16,000 from $68,000 to $84,000. This is primarily due to the purchase of a new vehicle that they are requesting for the upcoming budget year. In total, there's $6.3 million in requests from outside agencies, and the county funding is recommended at $5,250,903.
Yeah, just to add, on the economic development, they did ask for 312. And in the budget itself, we're recommending 262. There is, however, $50,000 in a non-departmental budget line item. We've been working, myself and the city manager of Concord and city manager of Kannapolis, I've been working with Mr. Cox and the EDC to what is the additional funding, what are we going to get? And we've identified some programs, and they'll be presenting them to you Thursday night, of what those programs are. And if it's something that the board so chooses, there is the additional $50,000 is in the budget. We would just move it from one line item back over to here if you support those projects that they're going to be presenting to you. Just wanted to keep that added to you.
What do the cities give to EDC?
I'm not sure with the breakdown. We can get the breakdown, but the increase in funding, they're requesting an increase of funding of 50 from the county, and then they're also requesting an increase of funding from the city of Concord of 15,000 and the city of Kannapolis 15,000 for a total of 80,000. The current breakdown, I don't have that, but we'll get that for you.
At the Wasatch board meeting last week, Wasatch board voted to contribute $15,000 and join the EDC as well as be a partner there too. So.
Okay. The five-year plan is found on page 77 through 80 of the budget document. As an overview, revenue for our reoccurring sources are projected to grow over the next 5 years, specifically in property taxes, sales taxes, and in permits and fees. However, the decline and loss of one-time revenue sources will have a negative impact on us, specifically in year 1, 2, and 3 of our 5-year plan. Expenditures, as directed by the board, will remain relatively flat over the next 5 years. However, due to the decline of those one-time revenue sources, we will have to assume absorbing cost increases over the next few years to keep a flat budget. Just to talk to you a little bit, explain a little bit some of the changes or some of the activity in the 5-year plan. Ad valorem taxes are projected to grow over the next 5 years, as I stated earlier, at rates between 1 to 2.5% between FY14 to FY17. Also in permits and fees, ambulance fees are projected to grow at a rate of 3.5%, building inspection fees 2.5%, and fees at Register of Deeds at 4%. Okay. So we are projecting steady growth in our recurring revenues over the next 5 years. However, our one-time revenue sources will be dropping off, as you'll see in the second part of our revenues. Specifically, lottery proceeds and COPS proceeds from some of the school debt. On the expenditure side, just to highlight some of the changes in our 5-year plan, you'll see for the current year all the changes that have occurred. These are the budgeted changes in expenditures in the FY13 recommended budget. As you move on to FY14, you'll see an addition of $63,000 in benefits for part-time employees. This is based on current legislation from the Obama administration, where the county will be required to provide health insurance for employees who work 30 hours or more. We currently do not have to provide that, but as a result of that legislation, that will have an impact on us, on the county, of about $63,000 for beginning in FY14. For the operating line under county services, the CPI has averaged, over the last 4 years, CPI has averaged about 2.5%. In order to keep the budget flat, we've been unable to increase the budget by that amount. So this is where you'll see where we will be absorbing the CPI increase that we anticipate to occur. The obligation to Kannapolis is in the 5-year plan as an increase from, I skipped over economic development incentive grants, excuse me. While there's a decrease in the economic amount budgeted for incentive grants for the current year, there is projected to be an increase for FY14, and then it will go down again in FY15 and in the subsequent years based on what we have on schedule as of now. The obligation to Kannapolis is a $1.4 million increase for the current year, and based on the payment schedule that is set up, you'll see the subsequent increases for the following years.
What is that $1.4 million to Kannapolis for?
It is for improvements that were made in Kannapolis. Specifically, the major thing is the Health Alliance building.
I thought that wasn't tax dollars paying for that.
It's the tax increment financing. It's the district that was established several years back, and then any value that has been added to that district, the taxes generated from that is what's being applied towards this debt service. That was the agreement that was done in December 2 years ago? December 2010.
But it is tax dollars.
It is new tax dollars off of the value that's grown since the district was established, but yes, it is tax dollars.
But I thought we were told it was not tax dollars.
No, it's been it's the tax dollars that represent just that small district.
The
We're
increase in
giving up
value.
the county's portion. Kannapolis is using their portion to pay it. Kannapolis issued the debt.
I had one question, I know that I ask it every year. Is there any way on our revenue side, I don't know, maybe up there, I didn't notice, but on the revenue side, I know we show the expenditure, the $1.4 million, but to show the amount as a separate line item on the revenue, just as on the 5-year plan, to show how much revenue is collected from the district, so we can see that? Because I know that the agreement was that we would pay 50% of the debt service up to the amount we collected. So if we collected less tax revenue than that half of the debt service, we would only be obligated up to whatever we collected. So there's that surplus. In other words, if it's $1.4 million expenditure, there's the obligation of Kannapolis, but if we brought in up there $1.5 million in property taxes, then actually there's a net of $100,000 in new tax revenue collecting from the district. That's what I was wanting.
Yeah, we should be able to get that information from Brent.
That's what I'd just like to see. I mean, there's like a separate line item that shows how much revenue came in from the TIF district and the increase each year, so that we can kind of see how that tracks. Because, the scenarios we all saw were that the revenue would increase greater, there would be a surplus of revenue generated above and beyond what the debt obligation was.
Yep, when the debt was actually issued, Kannapolis is collecting just about what their debt service is, and we were in about $1.8 million range. Since the proposed tax rate has been set, now we need to go back and see if we will actually collect the $1.4 million, but we can get that information from Brent and further break this down. So we'll try to get some of that information tomorrow.
And
What happens if you don't get it?
If we don't collect it, we don't pay it. We only pay up to what we collect, up to 50%.
But you don't get any of the tax money above that.
If it's above the 1.4, yes, we keep that.
The county keeps that money.
Yes.
Okay.
so who pays the remaining?
Kannapolis. Our obligation that our commissioners committed was to only commit to up to 50% of what the debt service would be based on what we truly collected. If we don't collect it, we don't pay it.
Or what if Kannapolis doesn't pay it?
Then that's Kannapolis's debt issue that they have to deal with.
Okay. And I know we discussed this several times, but I know there was some disagreement, I know in one meeting, of when we started collecting that tax money. And I don't think we ever heard, when we actually started collecting tax revenues from.
We can go back and get that information because we have schedules of when the district was
Okay.
originally established, and we can get those updated to let you know what the incremental tax would have been for each year since we've started it.
Okay. And I know the district was created for this purpose, but were we collecting tax revenues before that district was created? That's
Yes.
something. Okay.
Yes, we were collecting property taxes prior to the district being established, and once the district was established,
Then you
that
can-
was the base level, and then from there, the base level, anything above and beyond that, which is primarily the research campus, but there is some outlining areas in the neighborhoods surrounding that, but we should be able to get you that information.
So if we were collecting $500,000 in taxes off that district before the district was formed, we still get the $500,000 in taxes off that?
Correct.
Yeah.
But it was basically land before that, wasn't it?
Well, the mill was there, plant one.
Well, I'm more interested in when the research campus was created, when it was built, and how much, how long we collected before we actually set up the tax district. Not when the mill was there, none of that, strictly since it's been the research campus.
Because the research campus additions came after the district was established.
Okay, every bit of it, okay.
Yeah, that would have defeated the purpose to have constructed them
okay.
prior to that.
Did-
But we'll get you a value when the district was established, and then you can see the changes in it each year.
Yeah.
Did the mill pay their taxes when they were in bankruptcy?
Yes.
Those are some of the highlights, some of the new additions to the five-year plan in the expenditure side and the revenue side. You'll,
Just add real quick, if you look down at the revenues over expenditures for the next 3 years, we're holding pretty even there. But in year 4 and year 5, if we're able to keep the tax rate at 70 cent, then you're going to start seeing some additional monies there. And then at that time, then the board will have the opportunity to make a decision. Do we continue to stay at 70 cent and start increasing our fund balances so that we can start looking at pay-as-you-go for some of the larger projects? So,
I was going to ask about the fund balance. It seems higher than usual. Is that the amount it usually is? I thought it was much lower than that typically.
Are you referring to the 44 million?
Yes.
That's the total fund balance. You're probably familiar with the 16 that we were talking
Right.
about that was unallocated or undesignated, or check with Susan what the new term is, but there's a new term for it. But this is all the fund balance, whether it's assigned or committed
Okay.
or reserved by state statute was the old
Okay.
term, but stabilization, I think, is the new term.
Well, it said,
She's nodding with me, okay.
It says unassigned.
it
so
is,
that's what-
it's all of the unassigned fund
Okay.
balance.
All right.
And your 15%'s inside that number.
Yeah, and I think in previous years, the 15% wasn't in that number. This year, now because of the new way that, the new, I guess, assignment, or the new,
We can take it back to where it's
Descriptions.
just the undesignated amount, if that makes it easier, to where you know what you can truly spend. Okay, we can take it back to that.
okay.
I mean, based on the 200 million, 15% is 30 million. So that's what you've added in there, is what we have to have based on our policy in order to be able to pay bills. So you can take 30 million out of there. I mean, that's the part that we have to have in there, like I said, in order to operate, in order to make sure that you have the funds. So you're really down to the, subtract that out.
But we can definitely do that for you.
And that number's somewhere around 9 million prior to the close of the books that we're in right now. After we did some payments this year to pay off the debt, we did a preliminary number the other day to come up with what kind of monies that we might have available for one-time projects.
right.
Well, we're right on schedule. Are there any other questions about the five-year plan? Okay. Well, that concludes the first portion of my presentation on the overview of the budget. We are scheduled to take a break. Then the next part is for capital, is for us to discuss the CIP plan. So I'll pass it on to you, Madam Chair.
Okay, then we'll take about a 15-minute break.